Hello, welcome to the video. I finally got around to watching the Hazbin Hotel pilot, and this is something that, I mean, come on, I've definitely been aware of it since, certainly since release a couple years ago. Friends were saying, look, this is a pretty big deal. It actually, it got produced, even though it was originally this small little internet project, and it's a very independent kind of thing, but now it's real. I finally watched the pilot, and I want to share some of my thoughts on it for whatever that's worth, because you might think, well, oh boy, that's a super late take, and it is. It's been literally 2 years, but it's also still relevant because we haven't actually seen the show yet, and there seems to be a big question as to where it's actually going to be made available. It was picked up by A24, which is kind of insane in itself. We know A24 for their American art house movies, but always live action. And in my opinion, it seems like a pretty strange choice for A24 outside of the fact that this is insanely popular. Okay, so here's the headline. I have mixed feelings about the pilot, and as such, I have mixed expectations for the show that it will become, hopefully soon. But I want to make it very clear that I have lots of positive things to say about the project overall. I have very high hopes for how the show will continue to perform wherever it gets released. As long as it actually gets made and it gets released somewhere, this show will continue to do numbers, unless it's on some extremely restrictive streaming platform that most people just can't access. Whatever. Distribution is a huge part of the equation here, but we know how insanely popular this show is. People like the characters, people like VivziePop, the animator and creator behind the project in the first place. People love the style. It's gonna do well. So please rest assured that any of my critiques of the pilot, which I will be getting to towards the latter part of the video, can do no harm whatsoever. Nothing I say will ever put a dent in the show's reputation or its success, and I don't intend it to. I just want to share some critiques after I talk about a lot of the stuff about this show and just its existence that I really, really love. I'm starting with the positive things. I'm starting with positive things about this show, and the biggest one is just that it exists at all. Given how things are turning out with certain streaming services, we know that eventually, at least a fair number of the major streaming services we have now will probably die off. Fact is, we might be seeing less money spent, less big budget money spent by streaming services on animated content in the near future. So in that instance, what do all these interesting little projects that would have been greenlit by Netflix or somebody else, where do they go? How do they find success? Will they be able to live on at all? Is it just really going to head the direction of independent funding and crowdfunding stuff? What I'm saying is this is a very interesting time for animated content, specifically adult animation, independently financed animation, and I'm really glad that Hazbin has had the success that it has, and that's by far my favorite thing about this show is that it exists, that it has found its audience, and that it was basically grassroots. I mean, grassroots infused with internet connections, but still, it was just this idea that one person had, and it was expanded by a team of other people, and then this massive group of supporters. That is so cool, and I think that we should really hope for that kind of stuff to happen more often, and that's yet another reason why it's really important to seek out stuff online, especially smaller stuff that you really want to support, that you want to see sort of grow and expand. Did I mention, by the way, that I have a Patreon now? We have a whole Discord server. We're talking about all this stuff over there too. Anyway, so that's great, and I appreciate the clarity that is present in how Hazbin Hotel was executed in the pilot. There's certainly a very clear vision to how everything looks, character designs, and overall production. I'll talk about sound effects and music and stuff a little bit later on. But also great that it doesn't feel like it got watered down in the production process. There are moments where you can notice some kind of the seams showing where it's like, okay, this was probably lower budget than the average animated TV show, which is fine ultimately. I don't think that really gets in the way of enjoying the show or seeing what they're trying trying to do with it and the kinds of characters they're trying to present there. I'm very happy about that. I'm happy about all this stuff, and I'm really glad that it seems like it's going to continue to be successful. So there you go. Lots of positive things to say about Hazbin Hotel. Lovely. Just kind of a miracle in a way. At the same time, I hope it becomes less miraculous for these kinds of projects to find their funding and grow their audience. Like, that's the best thing, as opposed to some studio or streaming service throwing darts at the wall and like, I don't know, maybe people will like this idea, maybe whatever. No, here you have like strong evidence of support from the beginning. People are invested in it. People feel like they're part of the process. Awesome. I hope that becomes much more common. That's that. Now I would like to talk about some specific aspects of the show and my impressions of those aspects. First things first. This is a musical show. I get the feeling that it's going to continue to have a bunch of songs. This is not new, of course. There seems to be just an incredible like relationship between animated content these days and musical theater numbers. We've seen it a huge amount with Steven Universe. We've seen it a huge amount with Centaur World, which has some excellent songwriting, like killer songs in that one. Even Kipo, I guess, has, a bunch of songs in it, even though I guess it's more like, those are more like pop songs than classical musical theater kind of songs. Either way, it's a big thing, and it seems like there is a really meaty overlap between people who really like animation and people who also really like musical theater. And just looking specifically at Hazbin and how the songs there have performed, like, people absolutely love it. And I would not be surprised to hear that a lot of fans of the series were specifically sort of drawn in by the music. Personally, I am fine with the music. None of them wowed me. I don't know who was on the songwriting team here as compared to like Centaur World and Steven Universe and everything, but it's decent writing, decent songs. The singing is lovely. I have no issues with any of that stuff. So that's that. Music is fine. I was not blown away, and maybe part of that was the expectation, like knowing how many people love these songs to death. I was like, okay, yeah, it's fine. It is okay. Okay, so now I'll talk about animation and visuals going on here. So, I mean, obviously it's all hand animated stuff for our character work here, and that just immediately wins points from me. It looks great. The individual character animations are very impressive. I'm sure people have done like animation breakdowns of some of this stuff. It works very well overall, but I do have some things about the visuals that are just really, really not for me. So I don't know whether you would qualify these as critiques or not, but I know for certain in my gut that I just don't like these aspects of the visuals of the show. So first of all, everything is extremely flat. Like extremely flat visually. That doesn't mean like bad, that just means flat as opposed to giving the impression of depth. Not the strangest thing for an animated show, of course. I mean, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, The Simpsons, those shows are also generally very flat, although The Simpsons, I guess, has kind of added more depth in the later years when no one actually watches. But here, like, it's almost stifling to me just how flat everything is. Like, backgrounds, especially, backgrounds should be an area where we feel some sort of depth, and that's because those don't have to be changed all the time. When it comes to character animation, giving a sense of depth is much more difficult because those are being drawn and colored over and over and over again. But backgrounds, no, that's one and done. And here, very flat, and I think that combined with our color palette here, which is just tons of red and pink and black. I do get it. I understand that it's literally hell. It makes me feel like stifled and claustrophobic. Maybe someone could argue, and I'm sure they will argue if they happen to watch this video, that it's meant to be that way. Oh, that's the intended effect. It's meant to feel like kind of gross and dingy and awful. I don't enjoy it, and I don't think that argument holds up when we look at other aspects, especially when it comes to character stuff. Sure, we have a bunch of like mean, angry characters just being super aggro all the time and trying to make other people's lives worse. Yeah, but the center of everything here is light, right? It's about brightness and joy and positivity in the context of all this darkness and misery and stuff. And I never felt that visually at all. I guess maybe during one of Charlie's songs, like the one that she does on the news, I guess has some lighter visual elements. I would have to go back and check again. But other than that, I just felt like, wow, it is so so dark and so flat that I kind of feel like I'm leafing through a children's book for just like a masochist in training. Like I don't enjoy being here, and that's a pretty big negative when it comes to an animated property for me. So much of what I like in animated shows is getting to inhabit these wonderful spaces, and that doesn't mean they always have to be like pleasant and upbeat, but giving me something here to enjoy about the environments would have been much appreciated. I didn't really get that at all. And my take, I guess, is that the biggest opportunity to offer that to viewers in the full show is in the hotel itself. Like the whole point is, okay, this is Charlie's space. It's representative of her and her ideals and trying to redeem people and trying to be positive. That is the space to make more comfortable. And also because I'm sure we're going to be spending a ton of time in the hotel, if not the vast majority of our time in the show in that hotel. So please, please make it a nice space to be in, or like at least heading in that direction. Maybe it's a gradual change as they fix it up. It's stifling otherwise. And that really detracts from my enjoyment of the show. Other visual elements, especially in background stuff and buildings and things, there seems to be some clear influence from German Expressionism, and I guess you could even say that like some of the character designs are an extension of that. Really harsh angles, sharp, everything sharp everywhere all the time. Definitely characters are extremely sharp. That is a-okay. It is another element that I don't particularly enjoy. We also know that there's a lot of influence here from like early 2000s American cartoon, like Cartoon Network stuff. The guy who helped out was it the Billy and Mandy guy? It feels very much like Billy and Mandy, doesn't it? Like maybe too similar? Like maybe almost exactly the same some of the time, but with swears. We'll talk about that later. It's fine. Again, it's just one of those things that doesn't happen to be for me. Not necessarily a critique. But the animation of the characters wins me over regardless. You know, the designs or whatever. But just the way they move and the way that their movement is an expression of their personality, it's perfect. It's classic animation. Moving on to... Do I need to say anything specific about the characters? I don't think so. I mean, Charlie is what, like, I'm sure there's a name for the archetype, but like Leslie Knope, Molly McGee, just ultra positive in the face of adversity and trying to do right by everybody and be the change that she wants to see. I think that's an excellent character type to depict right now in particular, and I am fine with that. I won't say that Charlie necessarily feels all that different from plenty of other characters I've seen before, but that is not a crime. That is not a sin. Oh, that's much better given the show we're talking about, isn't it? I'm interested to see where the visuals go as they are right now. Not totally my cup of soup. In fact, I don't really like soup in general, but here's it's okay. So now to turn over to some of my least favorite things about the show. Brace yourselves. Oh, I'm sure the people who are mad at me have already stopped watching. So, but specifically, I would like to talk about some of the writing of the show thus far, meaning just the pilot, as well as sound design and sound mixing. And it's possible that I have the largest number of issues with these two aspects because these are two aspects that I happen to have like a little bit of, knowledge and professional experience with. I mean, specifically writing. That's what I do professionally. And then sound design is just something that I've really been interested in and I've messed around with for many years now. But I do have some issues here. I would like to talk about them. Okay, sound effects, sound mixing, sound design, that whole umbrella of categories. Not music. We already touched on music. I think we've done enough there. I have no issues with how the music sounds in this show. One of the most prominent choices you feel here in the show, and yet another thing that links it back to Billy and Mandy, is the extremely frequent use of sound effects, and I think we could easily call them very stereotypically cartoony and like zany in italics sound effects. And like that's one thing, that's one choice, is to include those at all, and that's not necessarily a choice that I enjoy because in my opinion they end up making the show just feel like grating and annoying and like the kid at the party who just can't stop jumping up and down for attention. So there's that. At times I also think the use of those kinds of sound effects, even in shows like Billy and Mandy and plenty of other classics that use them, can get in the way. Like they can actively distract from dialogue, character interactions, even just visual elements going on. I don't agree with that choice, but I still respect it just fine. My real issue with the sound effects is how they are mixed. And I've tried to test out the sound. Like I've tried to go through that pilot on a couple of different devices here. One was like built-in computer speakers, which are, awful to begin with, so that's fine. But then just also really nice reference headphones, which should be giving me the clearest indication of how these things were intended to sound, of how they were originally mixed. And even there, I think those sound effects are mixed very loud. Like it's not just a preference thing. Like I think they are mixed too loud to come across as professional. The levels that they're mixed at, for me, just heighten the issues that I already have with using these kinds of sound effects as frequently as they're used. They're completely distracting. They completely distract me from dialogue and character stuff. They distract me from what's happening visually at times. And there are other times where the sound effects, like the timing, doesn't seem to fit like the edits. There's one moment in particular where, and I can't even show it because I know I'll get copyright claimed in 2 seconds fucking flat. Anyway, I can't show you, but there's a moment where there's a wolf howl, and it's supposed to emphasize that like something Charlie said just drops flat, and like no one's responding to it, and it's highlighted as like, oh, that was a dumb thing to say, or like us other characters, we don't agree with that. You just knew that this sound effect, this howling sound effect, was supposed to play out in its entirety before we cut to the next shot or before the dialogue picks up again, and it doesn't. Instead, you have this howl, which starts at a certain pitch and then drops off. Boo! That's my howling sound effect. It's almost done, and then they cut to another shot and the dialogue starts up again. And that was just bad editing, in my opinion, because it didn't let the joke happen. It doesn't work. I'm saying this is an example of some sound mixing stuff that just flat out doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, the biggest sin for me there is just how loud sound effects are. And that just only gets worse the worse that your speakers are. So on the headphones here, still sounds very bad, not happy with it. But then if you go down to like a phone speaker, for example, it's just gonna sound even worse. Even at the best quality possible, I just don't think it was a good call. And again, I mean, I have confidence that that's not the kind of decision or potentially the kind of mistake that will be made in full production. Like I'm sure it'll be up to snuff, it'll be a-okay. And my final thing here is about the writing, and oh man, this is so long. People are gonna be so mad at me. I don't want people to be mad at me. I like being positive. But then again, like that's what I'm here to do. We need to talk about like issues, and I need to talk about my opinion. So please forgive me before I say some harsh things about the writing of the pilot of Hazbin Hotel. And hey, yet another thing that might change significantly when the full show actually gets produced and released. Like I'm sure there will be a writer's room, at the very least multiple writers. It'll probably be lessened or completely eliminated. But for me, a lot of the dialogue here, an overwhelming amount of the dialogue here, seems to be really pressing hard into this singular voice. That's not voice in the literal sense. Oh, by the way, the voice acting in the pilot is very mixed. Like, some of it's incredibly solid. Other voices were like noticeably amateurish and distracting. But anyway, so in terms of voice, in the context of writing, we're talking about like underlying character, style, personality, things like that. And of course, when it comes to writing many different characters, you want them to sound as distinct from one another as possible, while also fitting in the confines of the show's overall tone and vibe. Parks and Rec, everybody's very heightened, but they still have very distinct personalities. They each have their own little archetype. They're very well defined. And over here in Hazbin, I think it comes down to specific character dialogue where I'll be listening to it, and this is the real trick. I tried it listening to the show without looking at the screen, and the only thing that differentiated these different characters for me was the voice acting. And that might sound incredibly obvious, like of course they have different voices. Of course that's how you would tell them apart. But no, the dialogue should also set them apart. If I were to read the dialogue for every character in the same voice, in my own voice, with like no acting going on, we should be able to tell who's who, or just that there are different characters in the room. Do you know what I mean? And here, I don't feel that most of the time, especially when it comes to anyone outside of sort of our main three people. It's hard to describe, and again, I really wish I could show clips, and I just can't. A lot of these characters sound extremely similar. they basically just sound like the writer, which is a big no-no when it comes to writing dialogue for different characters. Charlie, I'm fine with. Charlie, I think, is quite distinct, both in terms of dialogue and voice acting. It's a completely different tone. It's extremely energetic. Other characters are much more sarcastic, blasé, low energy for the most part, or negative in a general sense. And that's where we run into the mud. Things start to sort of mesh together way too much when so many of the characters sound so similar, and something that does not help that out at all is the cussing here, the swear words that we have here. The cussing here, so I don't have it like an ethical or moral issue with cussing in general. Like, I swear all the time in my daily life, like it's part of me. But at the very least, I would like to think I employ those words with selective taste. Swear words are not sprinkles. Like, you can't just throw them everywhere and expect them to have the same amount of impact every time, because the more of something you have, the less valuable it is. Currency, product imaging, and in fact it's arguable that that's what Andy Warhol was doing by repeating corporate imagery ad nauseum, was removing power from its presence. There's so much swearing in here. I think we get a couple of is and bitch, I think, probably win the day. Maybe someone's done a count of like the individual swear words used in the pilot, but those two in particular are used so often by so many different characters that not only does it make the characters blend together and just feel incredibly samey, but those words start to mean absolutely nothing to me, and I don't understand. I don't understand if, like, Vivzie Pop, maybe this is just one of her things, because in the description of the pilot on YouTube, she swears, she says fuck, right? That's whatever. Okay, so this is maybe just part of her too. Maybe like me, she swears a lot in daily life. I'm A-okay with that. But this is maybe why we have editors. This is maybe why we have other people look at a script. I think there were here on the team. I think there were script editors and people contributing to that. Although Vivzie Pop has the only screenwriting credit, I don't know what the process looked like there. But in my opinion, more should have been done to edit this script and improve dialogue. It should have been tighter. It should have been more distinct. And the cursing, the other example I can go to right now in terms of like just completely useless, meaningless, ineffective swearing in an animated show is Legend of Vox Machina, which I hated. But one of the things that I hated the most about that show was like the seeming attempts to be like edgy or adult or like hardcore was just have the characters swear all the time. Modern swear words, damn the the weird fantasy context and everything. They just sound like people. They just sound like people who swear a bunch. And I don't know if that's exactly what's happening here, where maybe it is just a natural impulse of the writer to use this stuff constantly, 80% too much. I don't know. I don't think it's an attempt to seem like edgy or adult. It certainly qualifies the show as being more adult. There's also just tons of sex jokes and innuendo. I'm gonna coin this phrase, if no one else has come up with this before. I'm gonna call this a subgenre of animation, specifically a subgenre of adult animation that I'm calling naughty animation. And naughty animation is technically adult animation because it's definitely not for young kids, but in my opinion, it would probably appeal the most to like teenagers, because to a teenager, swearing's pretty edgy, right? Oh, they're starting to experiment with like adult ideas. Sex, obviously, a more adult concept, or just what a lot of swear words actually mean, like verbal violence is certainly a more adult concept in general. And it comes across that way to me. Not only the frequency of the words being used, the choice of the swear words being used, and execution. It comes across as very lame to me here in Hazbin Hotel, and I desperately hope, I really, really hope that it will be somewhat toned down in the full show, because for the moment there's just so many negatives from my perspective of what that's doing to the show, and it's getting in the way. And that's what most of my critiques have been about, I think, is that the core idea is excellent. It's really fun. You have some pretty decent character writing in terms of, who they are, personality, even visual design, but they blend, they are distracted from by sound effects, sound mixing, sound design, some visual elements, and dialogue. Those are getting in the way. They're getting in the way of the show itself and all the things that I love about it. And I don't think that the show would be losing much of anything. I think it would still appeal to just as many people. I think it would still be just as successful at telling its story without these elements. Please just tone it back. Please don't make the sound effects the star of the show, because they're not. They're really not. And also, maybe visually, give the audience just a tiny hovel where they can feel some kind of space or depth or just some kind of tone other than miserable, dark, depressing hell that's also sometimes sort of ugly and stifling. Tiniest things, you know what I mean? And I'm sorry for going on for some of these topics for so long, because I don't want to give the impression that they're super serious. They're really not, but they are critiques, and clearly I do have very strong feelings about each of these aspects. But as we wrap up here, obviously I'm very happy about the show's existence. I talked so much about that at the beginning, and yeah, the pilot is okay, but it clearly has so much promise, and it has the audience. So it was kind of a no-brainer to greenlight this for a full series, and I'm extremely excited about the full series. Please, A24, I'm speaking to you directly now. Please don't mess this up. Sorry, we're talking about Hazbin Hotel. Please don't this up, because it deserves so much. It deserves the attention. It deserves being made accessible to a bunch of different people. It's a weird, different idea. We need more of that. Please don't make it hard for people to watch this show. And when the full show comes out, we can talk about it some more. For the moment, those are my thoughts on the 2-year-old pilot for Hazbin Hotel. I hope you've enjoyed your time here, and yeah, thanks for stopping by.